Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Mishani Hawkins, and I'd now like to say you forever as a piece starting very soon. It's now time to start finding the seats for Sabbath services.
Can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Sonny Yisrayl Says Program, and I'd like to serve forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to introduce the sons and daughters of Yisrael now entering the sanctuary. And now I'd like to turn it over to the first speaker, Tanya Hireman.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. The title of my speech is The Instructions for the Last Days. We must obey Yahweh, Yeshua, and Israel Hawkins. Yahweh's instructions are to keep his laws. Yeshua says in Matthew 6:33 to seek first the kingdom of Yahweh. Israel Hawkins' instructions are to come to the House of Yahweh, and now the message is going out to all the nations. Pastor reminds us how Yahweh instructed man in the 17th book of Israel, chapter 5, verse 20. It says, "So all that work that Yahweh had done up to that point was destroyed, right? No, it had just began. In fact, he made man subject to sin, and then he told them, don't sin, obey me, don't sin, do what I tell you to do." That's the biggest lesson that we can learn, and we've learned it here. We've learned it. Yes, praise Yahweh. And I'll show you that in scriptures. It's also in the Numbers. Did you notice that in the Numbers today? That's exactly what the House of Yahweh is teaching in this time period. Yahweh says is going to work this time. He made man subject to sin to teach him a great lesson he's never going to forget. And Yisrael Hawkins also says to use the name Yahweh. Please turn to Psalms 8:1, found on page 437. It says, "How excellent is your great name in all the earth, Yahweh our sovereign King. You have your glory firmly set above the starry frame, the heaven. If you keep the laws of Yahweh, you'll have many blessings," like Psalms 8 and verse 6, found on the same page. "You made man to be ruler over the works of your hands and put all things under his feet." But if we do not use the name of Yahweh, we will not keep his laws, and dying we will die. Please turn to Romans 6, verse 23, found on page 878. It says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of Yahweh is eternal life through Yeshua Messiah our Savior." Yes, if we sin, dying, we will die. But if we want to be in the kingdom of Yahweh, we must obey all the instructions of the people over us, because all authority is from Yahweh. In the 17th book of Israel, chapter 19, verse 92, Pastor says, "I'm telling you, you came here for a purpose, to learn Yahweh's way. But if you disobey me, you're disobeying the Savior, and you're disobeying Yahweh. You won't make it into the kingdom. You're just wasting your time here. You can't keep one foot in the house of Yahweh and one foot in hell. The gates of hell will not prevail against this house." Yahweh bless your understanding. I'd like to turn over to our next speaker.
To remain standing right now, I have our first speaker, Deacon Barcelona.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I'm going to be going over the benefits of keeping positive law number 9, which is sanctifying Yahweh's name. So the greatest benefit of keeping this law is that an individual can know Yahweh. And know Yahweh. You may ask, what does it mean to know Yahweh? Well, it doesn't mean just to know his name, how it's pronounced, but it means to understand who Yahweh is and what he expects of us as his children. And what sets us apart from being as the children of the world. So by sanctifying Yahweh's name, we set ourselves apart as being his peculiar people, as it says in 1 Kepha chapter 2 and verse 9. If you turn there, 1 Kepha chapter 2 and verse 9, it's found on page 958. It says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you would show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into this marvelous light." So Yahweh is a loving heavenly Father who only seeks the best for his children. And no one can deny the fact that everything we have, from the breath of air to shoes we wear, are all provided by Yahweh. And he allows these blessings to be given to us. Therefore, we must thank him for all that we have. If you turn over to Matthew chapter 10, found on page 737, Matthew chapter 10 and verses 29 through 31, found on page 737. It says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them falls to the ground without the Father's will. Even the very hairs upon your head are numbered. Therefore, do not be afraid, for you are worth more than many sparrows." So Yahweh knows everything. Yahweh knows if a sparrow drops out of the sky, Yahweh knows it, because he all allows it to take place. That being thankful there and Yahweh's protection, that reminds me of in Psalms 91, Psalms chapter 91. It's found on page. It talks about Yahweh's protection and how he will protect us from various things that may seem to us to be troubling. Verse 5, it says, "You will not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day." So Yahweh will give us that protection, and since we are being protected by him, we won't be afraid. And in verse 8, it says, "Only with your eyes you will look, and you will see the reward of the wicked." So when all this fighting is going on, nations fighting against each other, dropping bombs, so on and so forth, we'll be here in the protected place, only seeing with our eyes what sin brings. Praise Yahweh. Verse 10, "No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your dwelling." So Yahweh's laws are established forever. And when we study them and find delight in them, and in keeping them, we will experience the joy of living. Otherwise, we will perish in affliction. So Yahweh is our strength and our deliverer. He promises that he will protect us if we follow his laws and sanctify his name. And Yahweh is our shield and our hiding place, and he will help us in times of trouble if we trust in him and sanctify his name as his holy people. And he promises that in Deuteronomy chapter 28, found on page 170, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 9 through 10. It says, "Yahweh will establish you as his holy people unto himself, as he promised you on oath, if you will keep the laws of Yahweh your Father and walk in all his ways. Then all the people on the earth will see that you are called by the name of Yahweh, and they will fear you." So they'll see that Yahweh is your Father and that you are his people. So an individual who sanctifies Yahweh's name will have a positive attitude, because he has his belief and faith is in Yahweh. And regardless in the situation that he finds himself in, he will know that Yahweh will be there for him. And Yahweh will not allow us to go under anything that we will not be able to bear. He will have a positive outlook. And anyone who sanctifies Yahweh trusts in him, knowing that nothing is possible without Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. If you would turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19, found on page 746. Or Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. It says, "But Yeshua, looking at them, said to them, with men this is impossible, but with Yahweh all things are possible." So when one goes through his daily life with its ups and downs, and especially those moments where it seems as if everything is not going right, then we have to maintain a positive attitude, knowing that Yahweh will be there for us and that we have to trust in him. If you turn to the book of Yahchanan, chapter 1, Yahchanan chapter 1, found on page 953, verses 2 through 5. It says, "My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various temptations, trials, knowing that the testing of your faith develops endurance." So once you go through these tests, and maybe you do fail some of these tests, you should take it as a learning experience, and it will develop endurance for you. "And let endurance have its perfect work, that you may become perfect and complete, lacking nothing." So once you go through these tests and you do pass the test, then you will lack nothing and you will be just like Yahweh. If you turn to Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, it's found on page 731. It says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of Yahweh. Blessed are you when men will revile and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for greatest is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." If you turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, found on page 520. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 7. It says, "In a multitude of dreams and in empty words there is much vanity, meaningless. Therefore simply reverence Yahweh." Simply reverence Yahweh. So Yahweh's way are simple. All Yahweh wants us to do is obey his laws and follow his commandments. That's very simple. So the definition of sanctify means to make holy or sacred, to set apart for religious use, to purify from sin or sinful affections. And that is what we're trying to do. If you turn to the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 10, Hebrews 10, 36 through 37. It says, it's found on page 949. It says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of Yahweh, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not delay." And the book of Luke chapter 22, Luke chapter 22, and verse 32, it's found on page 809. Verse 32. "But I have prayed for you that your faith does not fail. And when you are converted, strengthen your brethren." So, strengthen those around you. Whenever you have, passed those tests and you are becoming like Yahweh, you should go and strengthen your brethren so your brother can become just like you in Yahweh's image. So in conclusion, let's work in unity and show Yahweh that we are fit for a position in his great kingdom. And with that, if you'd all please stand. Okay. I'll turn it over to Great Deacon Azariah.
Shabbat Shalom. You all can be seated. Hopefully everyone is enjoying this beautiful Sabbath. The title of my speech is Study to Show Yourself Approved in Order Not to Be Deceived. So a few Sabbaths ago, Pastor gave us a homework assignment stating to study Matthew 24:24. And I don't know about many of you all, but at times I find it really challenging for me to get my mind on studying. So I got to thinking, how did Father Yahweh compel us to study? And if I was a father and had sons and daughters, how would I compel them to study, knowing that it was so vital for their salvation? And some of the things that I came up with is that Yahweh has given us an increase of knowledge that we have used to make the Yisrayl Says Program, which is a fascinating studying tool to use. He also has given us the lamplight sessions that captures the hearts and minds and the attentions of our young ones, which is important. He also has given us the ability to look up Hebrew definitions that give us that in-depth knowledge that we need to not be deceived. He has given us the Bible codes and astonishing revelation using the Gematria. And yes, he has even given us the greatest teacher in the world, our pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins. I always wanted to say that. Let's move on. All right. With that said, we're going to go ahead and read Matthew 24:24. And after that, we'll watch a short video and we'll get into what I found using the Gematria. So Matthew 24:24 states, "There will arise false messiahs and false prophets who will show great signs and wonders. If it was possible, they would deceive the very elect." Will you please play the video?
False Messiah. What if they said to you that Jesus was newly risen and here he is in Rome, and they show this man walking around with a hole in his side? Now, these people can imitate flesh. We see this in Book 1. If you want to study that a little, between now and next week.
Is that Jesus Christ? Please, oh Father God. Mom, es un hombre. Es un hombre.
Jesus, is that you?
Well, he says, false messiahs. False messiahs. And not just one. See, he could make his appearance in several different places. We're talking about a number that follows Satan.
Papa Morales was outside his house in Burbank, California, when he saw something strange in the sky. The unidentified floating object looks like a person descending from the clouds.
Well, here you're going to see these false messiahs will show great signs. You see that?
Is that Jesus Christ?
In the video, Pablo can be heard telling his family he thinks it's the second coming of Jesus. Telling his mother in Spanish, it looks like a man.
Mom, es un hombre.
They have lookalikes, so it could be, here's a pope that's introducing Jesus. I'm trying to think of all the possibilities that with the cameras running and on the news, and how many people throughout the world would head to Rome.
Es un hombre.
Pablo and his family watch as the object keeps descending closer and closer to their roof. As it sinks behind the house, Pablo asks the group if they think it is balloons.
You don't think that's balloons?
This was actually took place to deceive.
Looks like it's coming down.
But when he went to investigate, he says there were no balloons. He also says that because the family lives near an airport, drones aren't allowed.
Mom, es un hombre.
I can tell you from what Yeshua said that if something like this takes place, it's not true, it's false. There's only one place you're going to see Yeshua, and that's the House of Yahweh. Behold, I warned you beforehand now. Behold, I warned you beforehand. You better read the rest of that. Study it hard this week. Study it hard. Try to get ahead of me. so you'll know what I'm going to bring next Sabbath.
Praise Yahweh. All right. Praise Yahweh. So when I began studying this scripture, the first thing that jumped out to me was false Messiah. So, of course, I looked it up in the Gematria, and this is what I came up with. The first number is 445 in the Jewish Gematria. The second number is 816 in the English Gematria, and 136 in the simple. So the numbers for false Messiah given in the Gematria calculator is 445, 816, and 136. When I look the first number up, which is 445, we came up with God, El, is gracious. So right from the start, you can start seeing the name of these hinder gods and these false messiahs. And I just want the world to know that you're not saved by grace. You're saved by keeping the laws of Yahweh. Grace is not your Savior. It's Yeshua Messiah. Moving on, 410. 445 points us to 410 up there, which means El, God, the Mighty One, as a title of majesty and power, often used in combination with titles, other titles. Also, any false gods, any person who is strong, capable, mighty, power, idols, strong. And when I was reading this, it reminded me of the definition of Rome, which means strong soldier, and how the people was deceived back in Yeshua's time into thinking that the Savior would be like this warlike God that will usher in the kingdom, kill all their enemies, and they'll live a grand life. But that wasn't the case. They didn't read the scriptures and study. They did err not knowing the scriptures, that he would be meek. You know, the prophecy said that he would be a humble person that used his two-edged sword to cut down the layers of deception that was being taught. Just like our pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, is doing in these last days. Moving on to Thayers, I just looked up false Messiah in Thayers, and it's the Greek word 5580, which means one who falsely lays claim to the name and office of Messiah. One who falsely lays claim to the name and office of Messiah. And if you look up that word false, just in Google, just Googling it, you will see that it means not according with the truth or fact, incorrect, appearing to be the thing denoted, deliberately made and meant to deceive. Now we're going to get back to the Gematria. So 445 in the Greek, which is here, 445 in the Greek means to be proconsul. Proconsul. I want to key in on that word proconsul and give its definition. It says a proconsul was an official of ancient Rome who acted on behalf of a consul. A proconsul was typically a former consul. The term is also used in recent history for officials with delegated authority in the Roman Republic. Military command or imperium could be exercised constitutionally only by a consul. So you can see that all sin, just like all roads, lead back to Rome. These false messiahs lead right back to the 7 hills of the Vatican. So 816, we're moving on to 816. The next number for false messiah is 816 in the English. And what I want you to keep in mind is what Matthew 24 state, that these false messiahs and these false gods was going to show great signs that would deceive the many, if it was possible. Deceive us, if it was possible. So you see 816 right here, meaning to look intently, gaze, stare, look steadfastly, earnestly, beholding, earnestly look, fastening eyes, look earnestly. And you get the picture here. Their minds are already geared for these false messiahs to come and show them these great signs and wonders. They already been deceived and trained throughout the years to believe it. So when it comes, they're going to be gullible. So moving on to 136 in the simple. Right here. The simple gematria, the next number is 136, which actually shows the false Messiah who the whole world is praising at this time, and it's none other than Adonai. Right here it shows Lord, a title of one true God with a focus of his majesty and authority. So 136 takes us to 113, and it actually shows 136, 137, 138, and Lord, Master, Supervisor, one who has authority over another, husbands, honor the Lord with Yahweh, sovereign, Lord of lords, meaning the highest power, authority, Lord, Master, whatever, and you get the rest. 113 points us to 137. This is 137 right here, and you see the name of these false gods continue with this Lord of Bezek there. And it also shows Adonai, my Lord is Yahweh. So above you can see all of these false messiahs who falsely lay claim to the office of Yahweh for the purpose of deceiving the world with the tree of righteousness and evil. We know that Yahweh is not a Lord. You know, we've been taught by the greatest teacher in the world, and we have studied his teaching and all of the facts surrounding that to know Yahweh is not a Lord. Moving on to 139. Here you can see the false claim of the Lord's being righteous, which they are not. This is why we have to be careful in our study. Even in these resources right here, it's lies mixed with truth. So you have to be careful to follow the directions of the priests and the kahanas, so you will not go off track and be deceived, basically. So 136, 139. So moving on, we see right here, my Lord arises. If you can see that right there, my Lord arises. What is so fascinating about this is that if you read Matthew 24:24, it says, for there will arise false Messiah. It used that same word, arise. So I want to stop there and just dwell on that for a moment. If you don't take anything else from this, I know it's easy to get lost in the numbers and stuff like that, but I wanted to stop here to focus on this for a moment because this is an intriguing factor that can invigorate many of us to study and inspire us to study harder. So Matthew 24:24 states that these false messiahs will arise. What's the odds of you typing in false messiah in the gematria, which gives you the number 136 in the strongest of strongs, which points you to the number 140 right there as a definition for false messiah, which means my Lord arises. So these false messiahs are going to arise. The odds are high, brothers and sisters. It's not a coincidence. It's by design. So if you was to lead this work right now, you're not going to be deceived. You actually chose your deception because Pastor and the Kahanas get up here week after week flooding us with information so we don't be deceived, warning us, giving us warnings after warnings, showing us how to study, showing us the importance of it. So we have no excuse but to believe into the one sit and all that the prophets have spoken. Before I leave, I want to leave you with just this one last slide right here. This is Hebrew word 24:24, as in Matithia 24:24. Although you see right here Isis, Jesus, Joshua, you see right here Yahweh saves, Jesus. Although it shows these false messiahs, we in the house of Yahweh knows what Yahshua name means. It means Yahweh will save his people from their sins. So encoded here is letting the true believers know who actually took the time to study, and don't take this as face value. You have to have a teacher to be able to point these things out to you. Yahweh saves. So it's telling us right here, 24:24, as in Matthew 24:24, is that Yahshua is the true Messiah. With that said, I want to turn it over to the Great Deacon, Emmanuel Martin.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. All right. You can be seated. All right. Yahweh's peace be with each and every one of you, especially in this time period that we're in right now. We are in the last 3.5 years. Are you enduring this establishment? Yeah. Nice. You know, if you have some problems with that, if you have some problems with we're in these last 3.5 years, if you go back and listen to Sermon 629, Pastor lays it out right there that we are in this period that we've been waiting for. Listen to it over and over again until you can get an understanding that we are in this last time period, okay? So the last time I spoke, if you remember, I spoke on content and being satisfied with what Yahweh has given you right now. And this is a very important thing to remember, because as you see the last speaker talked about, there's going to be some deception coming. And we have an example of it with that little thing that he showed. So preparing ourselves for this deception, what I would like to talk about today is a skill that is, I don't think I could put a word on it. It's a skill that we're going to need to get us through this. And Pastor has, ever since he started teaching, this is what he's talking about, if you boil it down to it, okay? So start off, okay, we're going to start the sage here. I'll put that right there. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 1, and we're going to go chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, okay? And it says, Yahweh, who at various times and in different ways spoke in times past to our fathers through the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us through his Son. So this is some very common knowledge, right? Very common knowledge. Whom he has appointed heir of all things, for whom he has made the world. Okay? Now, jump over to Titus, chapter 2, verse 11 and 12, okay? Now, here's who he's working with. For the love of Yahweh that brings salvation has appeared to all men. He teaches us every Sabbath day, practically, unless it's Men's Day or Women's Day. Which, by the way, sometimes, you know, when women and the men speak, we kind of get relaxed a little bit because pastor's not speaking, but there is a amount of knowledge that comes through pastor's seed, because remember, the seed, this word would not depart from our mouth because we are listening to pastor, and that's something that I would like to get across, because I don't want just somebody just out there, well, just because it's Men's Day, we just kind of relax a little bit and don't take as many notes. It's very important to get this oil before deception comes totally, okay? So, verse 12, look at what he's teaching us. Teaching us that by denying unholiness and worldly lusts, we must live soberly, righteously, and in holiness in this present world. Okay? Living righteously and living soberly. You know, this being aware of what's taking place in this world right now. Because you know Satan does not want us to take over the position that she decided not to have. So if we look at everything by denying this holiness is what we're all about talking here. Okay, so the title of my speech today, okay, is Deny Yourself and You Will Receive Yahweh as an Inheritance. Because Yahweh is our inheritance. He maintains our lot. Without him, we're not going to be able to do this, okay? We're not going to be able to make it through here, okay? Turn over to Matthew, chapter 11, verse 29 and 30, okay? Let's get into what this is all about. Yahshua says, take my yoke, and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, the heart, the desires, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke, the laws of Yahweh, is easy, and my burden, the load that must be carried, is light. It's light. You know, the simplicity, as the Great Deacon Barslide was talking about, you know, the simplicity of this, of the message. Now, this word meek in that scripture right there, let me show you this. It's Greek word 4239. That says this difficult to translate root means more than meek. Biblical meekness is not weakness, but rather refers to exercising Yahweh's strength under his control. Please take notice of that. Demonstrating power without undue harshness. If you're like a supervisor, are you talking to people nicely? Let me show you something right quick. If you turn over to Romans chapter 15 on that. Let's look at chapter 15, verse 1. He says, when then, we then who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak. We might miscount something sometimes. Yep. And do not please yourself. Do not please yourself. Verse 2 there. Let each one of us please his brother or his sister for righteousness, to build the building of the house of Yahweh. Look at verse 3. This is very nice right here because, Yahshua is our example. He's cut and dry. For even Yahshua did not please himself, but it is written, the reproaches of those who reproach fell on me. What did he say? When he was just about to be hung on a stake, he says, if it be your will, please let this cup pass. But not my will, but your will. That's where we have to come to. When we're going through our sufferings and when we're going through this establishment, when we are weaning ourselves off the world, okay, not my will, Father Yahweh, not mine, but your will. Your will be done. Now, this word lowliness, a Greek word 5011, okay? There's the Greek word right there. I can't really say that word. My Greek is not great. But look, properly low, figuratively, enter lowliness, describing the person who depends on Yahweh rather than himself. In other words, denying pleasure of the world. Pastor gets up sometimes and he hears people want to go to Six Flags, and I'm not going to be knocking people, but what I'm saying is, when we decide to go out and pleasure seek like that, we come to the house of Yahweh knowing in our minds that we're going to put away pleasure. Okay? And I'm not saying, well, we can't have nothing in the house of Yahweh. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, do not let it get the best of you to where you're going to take that and say, well, I can't have this, I can't have that. The Kohans are telling me this. I'm out of here. Man, that's the worst thing you can do is quit. I'm going to tell you that reason why, because my counselor keep telling me the same thing. It's the worst thing you can do is quit. Because sometimes you get down, man. Sometimes you're grinding, you're gritting your teeth, you're trying to work through it, and you just fall. Bam. Man, is it worth it? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Praise God. On the bottom right here it says, lowly, humble means being Yahweh reliant rather than self-reliant, which ironically always exalts the person. We are not to rely on ourselves. Every time I rely on myself, I always mess up, or I'm messing something else up for somebody else. And when that takes place, envelopes start flying. I get kicked out of the press room, like I said before. When I focus on myself, instead, there's one word that always pays me dividends. Manny? Yes? Go do such and such. Okay? That's what I'll do. That pays me so much dividends because what takes place is I'm taking myself out and I'm focused on what the instruction is. When we don't focus on what the instruction is, there's when we have a problem. When we're moving too fast and we got too much things other than Yahweh's kingdom on our mind, there's where we have the problem. Our minds should not be on anything else other than Yahweh's kingdom and pleasing our brothers. And I have a great deacon who's going to be bringing something on this right here. A friend of mine, he's going to be bringing an excellent message on esteeming one another. Now you can replace that word right there with that, okay? Esteeming one another, pleasing one another. What can I do to please my brother or sister today? Not only today on the Sabbath, but every day of the week. When you're in the workforce right there, grinding it out. What can I do? In other words, taking that and putting yourself out. Because look, putting yourself out takes a lot of courage. And it takes a lot of determination to keep the focus in mind. And the focus is becoming like Yahweh. Remember, we're going to inherit Yahweh, inherit his character. And not only that, but also the knowledge that he has, that he's going to share with us. Okay? So, Matthew chapter 16. Now, let's look at Yahshua's thoughts here on denying yourself. Okay? Matthew chapter 16, 24. Then Yahshua said to his disciples, now he's talking to his disciples, if anyone will come after me, then let him deny himself and take up his yoke and follow me. We'll get into his yoke in a little bit, okay? Luke. Okay? How often do you need to take up this yoke? Okay? He tells you right here. Luke chapter 9, 23, verse 24. Then he said to all of them, if any man will follow after me, let him deny himself and take up his yoke daily. Daily. And follow me. This is not just on the Sabbath day when you're in front of all your brothers and sisters. We put on a little pretending act or show. This is daily. Every single day. This is what you got to do. Now, whoever will save his old life will lose it. But whoever will lose his life, and that's what you come here for, to lose this old life, the life that we buried in that water. Whoever will lose his life for my sake, the same will save it. So you're going to make it into the kingdom. When Yahshua and Pastor looks on your character, looks in your heart, looks into your desires, into your craving, because you know Yahweh works with the heart. That's the unit that he works with. Okay? He works with the heart. Now, let's go into a definition here. This is the definition of deny. Okay? It says, I've got two copies here. Hold on. And that one goes on the bottom. It says, to deny. Look back to what was originally refused. What was originally refused? Pride, arrogance, fornication, adultery. These things, these crimes, as Pastor calls them, they're crimes. Suggest, strongly reject, especially the source, the carnal nature. This utter refusing to recognize the original source involved, hence that's the word 533, can imply ignore, disown. Okay, I knew I was going to mess this word up. Repudiate, I think that's called. Sorry. So it means to refuse to accept or associate with the carnal mind, the things that we buried, the envy, the jealousy of one another. These things like that is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to ignore these things. The self-gratification. Let me give you some science here. Let me show you something here. Okay? It says, studies show that delayed gratification is one of the most effective personal traits of successful people. Everybody here is successful. You fall, okay, but you're successful. People who learn how to manage their needs to be satisfied in the moment thrive more in their careers, their relationships, health, and finances than people who just give in. Choosing to have something now might feel okay or great right now, but making the effort to have discipline and manage your impulses can result in bigger and better rewards in the future. Over time, delaying gratification will improve your self-control and ultimately help you achieve your long-term goals. On the bottom right here, show you this. Are you able to wait for things you really want? Even if it involves sacrificing pleasure and satisfaction now? Do you make decisions based on your life purposes or on what feels great at the moment? Do you sometimes give in too soon? Think about it. The things in life that brings us immediate gratification, like food, gambling, drugs, sex, screaming from anger, or using credit cards, don't necessarily bring out the best in us. They just ease the discomfort for the moment. Right there on the bottom, true joyfulness entails delaying pleasure, putting in the time, discipline, and patience instead of feeling great right now. Okay? So ignore these things. Okay, put that over here. All right. Oh, sorry. It also says to forget oneself, lose sight of oneself and one's own interests. So our interests are only for one another. Our own interests are for one another. Now notice here in Luke, this is very important. Look at what Yahshua says right here, okay? So Luke 14:25 through 27 and verse 33. It says, now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if any man comes to me and does not love me more than his father, his mother, his wife, his children, his brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Look how many times he said that in this. And whoever does not carry his yoke and walk after me, in other words, imitating my life, drink that cup as you see me sometimes have up here, drinking that cup. Whatever we have to go through to make it to this kingdom is worth it. It hurts, but when we are tested and tried, after that, we're going to reap the benefit. Okay? Then he says, so in the same way, whoever it is of you who does not forsake all that he has, he cannot be my disciple. He cannot be my disciple. Now let's take a look at some checklists. This is what I call checklists sometimes. You know, we have them sometimes in the scriptures there. Okay, let's take a look at this first one right here in Galatians chapter 5, 19 through 21. Okay, so the works of the flesh, they're obvious. Which are these? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, licentiousness, God worship, sorcery, hatred, contentions. Let everything be done without strife, evil jealousies, rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, disagreements with quarreling, heresies, sects or factions of divisions. Number 22 there says, envy, murder, drunkenness, revelry, and the like, of which I warn you beforehand, just like I did in times past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom. Okay? Timothy, real quick here, it says, this is another checklist. Okay, this is what we're supposed to get out. Okay? Out of our hearts, because that's where it is. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3, 1 and 5. Know this also, that in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection. Got to get these things out. Okay? Verse 4 here, we got to skip down. Traitors, betrayers, headstrong, arrogant, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Yahweh, having a form of holiness, but denying the authority of it. From such, turn away. We got to turn away from these things because we're building a character here. We're building a character that's going to be forever, and we're going to inherit a job that's going to be forever. Okay? So, in closing, 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3, okay? Not one of you would be moved by these afflictions that we have to go through to enter into this kingdom. Yes, we have to suffer a little bit, so we have to understand when we suffer, we see the results of sin. Okay, we see what is the results of sin, and what that does is we'll be able to teach these results to the nations. And it says, for you yourself know that we are appointed to this. We are appointed to these afflictions right now to get the knowledge that we need about what sin brings in our life and in the world's life also. You know, so if you can please take these things to heart that I'm talking about denying self-pleasure right now. Because deny right now and be given everything later. That's what we're here for. Not that we should be seeking this, the rewards. We should be seeking the character and knowing how much the character is right. We should be seeking that. Please, if you don't take nothing out, please understand how important it is to deny these worldly pleasures right now for something better in the end. Okay? Praise Yahweh, okay? Y'all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the Great Deacon, Anthony Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. First Saints of Yahweh, please be seated. Yahweh's peace be with each and every one of you. If I could get everyone to write down a question. I know it's a question of the day. Everybody has been thinking about this question. What do I deserve? What do I deserve? Write that down, please. Think about it. Think about it biblically, not just spiritually. Not just physically. What do I deserve? If we could turn over to 1 Kepha on page 960. 1 Kepha, chapter 5. Chapter 4. It's in chapter 4. We're reading verses 12 and 13 there. Give you the title here in a minute. Now that word deserve, do we have the slide? You should be able to see what it's saying there. If you wrote down, do something or have or show quality worthy of. What do we deserve? Merits earned, well-deserved, fitting, appropriate, suitable, proper. Keep those meanings in mind. In verse 12 of 1 Kepha chapter 4, Beloved, do not be amazed concerning the fiery trials which you must undergo in order to be tested. And we are being tested for the kingdom of Yahweh. We are being tested for the job that Yahweh so desperately wants to give each and every one of us. It's the reason we are going through this trial and this test. Verse 13, but rejoice in the fact that you are partakers of the Messiah's suffering. This is not our own suffering. Rejoice in that fact. So when you're feeling like you're left alone or no one cares, remember this. You are rejoicing and you are partaking in Messiah's suffering. That when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. I want you to keep that in mind. Now you wrote down what we deserve, right? Everybody answer the question? Let's play the clip, please, the video.
Result in an abundance of food. As the season passes, the young female goes from strength to strength, having lost most of her infant down. But today, her parents seem less forthcoming with food. They are trying to encourage their daughter to start exploring her world. The parents come and go, teasing their chick. She seems agitated at their lack of parenting. But her frustrations are their intention.
But her frustration is their intention. It's a training that Yahweh is allowing us to undergo. Our suffering is needed. It's not extra. It's what we were meant to go through. It's what we were meant to be dealing with at this time. The title of my sermon is, What Are We Entitled To? What are we entitled to? If you could show the word entitlement. Write it down. The word entitlement, one of the meanings there, they believe that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. They believe that one is deserving of special treatment and privileges. Now, if you remember in Revelations 22:14, it said we have the right to the tree of life. Are we entitled to it? What does the word right means? Could we show the word right, please? The word right, that which is morally correct, just, and honorable. Yahweh is a businessman. He wants to return his investments. We are his workers under Pastor Israel Hawkins, by the way. Always will be under Pastor Israel Hawkins. No one should want no other way. We wouldn't even know what to do. So, think about that now. Entitlement. I am tired of being single. So I deserve to have a spouse. I'm such a hard worker. I don't understand why I still can't get to a higher position. These are just some of the thoughts of how we think of being entitled, when we think of entitlement, okay? These are some of the thoughts that go through our mind. And if we're not careful, it could subtly, these things are subtle. Remember that sermon some years back with the frog in the pan? They're very subtle. It could sneak up upon us if we're not careful. When you remember that meaning of what entitlement means, they believe that we are inherently deserving privileges. That bird didn't realize that there will come a time, that eagle, that they will have to start working, doing their job to provide for themselves. And if Yahweh could take the things of nature, and if you remember in Deuteronomy 32, the eagle stirs up a nest. Young men, young women, you got to ask yourself this question too. What do you think you are entitled to? All of us in the house of Yahweh. Continue here. I'm a great homemaker. I work hard to keep the house clean and tidy. I deserve to have a bigger, nicer home. I work so hard to provide for my family. I deserve to watch television when I come home. Of course, these are things as sinners we think about. But really think about it. What are we entitled to? Psalms 51 verse 5. You don't have to turn it. You can mark it down. We were born and conceived in sin. We were born and conceived in sin. The wages of sin we know is death. What were we entitled to? What was our judgment? If it wasn't for our Savior, Yahshua Messiah, where would we have been? No, this man proved himself after he died. When he died, his proving was proved. It was done. If Yahshua did anything up to that point, brothers and sisters, we wouldn't have a high priest. And he tells us that we have more to overcome than he had to, mentally. Because we are at the peak of sin. Everything is pulling at us. The world is very attractive. And yes, you may find some success, but you will find something else with that success too. And in the house of Yahweh, if you don't make the house of Yahweh a way of life to you, it seems only strict and boring and rules. Strict and boring and rules. And when you're young, that's understandable. That's the limit your mind has at this time. But like Pastor say, if you hang in there, if we just hang in there and try to encourage each other, build each other up, because it's very easy to tear down. But building each other up, because we don't know what other person may be going through. Get to know each other a little better. Yahweh is our shepherd. Psalms 23 verse 1. We shall not want. Yahweh will provide our every need. When you think of entitlement, think of that. Psalms 23 verse 1. Yahweh will provide our every need. Okay, turn over to page 515. Page 515. That's Proverbs, chapter 30. And look at 7 and 8. 2 things I request of you, do not deny them to me before I die. Remove vanity, God worship, the worship of Elohim, and destruction and lies, deceit far from me, and give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with food prescribed for my portion. And the scripture talks about, don't give me too much that I forget you, or too little that I curse you. Just my daily needs. These are the things you should start drawing a picture when you think of entitlement. Praying without ceasing. Do not quench spirit holy. Yahweh has given us an opportunity, brought us back through His Son, and given us an opportunity to become entitled. But we have to go through the suffering, as we read in the Kepha. We have to rejoice in the suffering and the correction. Don't think it's something overbearing that we are going through. It's what you were meant to go through. Don't think you're entitled to somebody or something. No. Yahweh will give you what you need when you need it. If the suffering or the heat, whatever you may be going through right now, that's exactly what you are meant to go through right now. Because Yahweh has a job for you and I. And He said, when you're proven fit, when you're proven fit, then we'll have the opportunity to rejoice and do all those great things with each other in the work. And we should be rejoicing now in this work and with the suffering or the things we are undergoing. Turn to 1 Timothy. That's on page 936. 1 Timothy. Look in verses 7 and 8. 1 Timothy 6. It said, and pay attention to these verses here, for we brought nothing into this world. What are we entitled to? And it is certain that we can carry nothing out. We brought nothing in. And having food and clothing, let us be content with these things. Having food and clothing, let us be content with these things. Yahweh wants to give us everything, brothers and sisters. He has it all in plan for us. But we have a job to do first. Humility and the willingness to give up our rights are not prized virtues in this world, but they are stunningly beautiful to Yahweh. Humility and the willingness to give up our rights are not prized virtue in this world, because in this world you are told to be all you can be. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. You could be so successful. But they are stunningly beautiful to Yahweh. Someone I was talking to last Sabbath told me, know how you win Yahweh's heart? Humility. Humility wins Yahweh's heart. And Pastor said that's putting on the white garment. Think about it. We need to understand that if Yahweh give us a family, that's Yahweh's family. That son, that daughter, that wife, that husband, they belong to Yahweh. And Yahweh is watching every move and everything we do with his possessions. And we are qualifying or disqualifying ourselves. Now, I want to bring this in here in Matthew chapter 20. Just going to really bring in this entitlement role a lot more clearer. Matthew chapter 20, and we're going to start in verse 1. Everyone should know this story here. For the kingdom of Yahweh is like a householder when he set out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And when he had made an agreement, House of Yahweh has no agreement with God's, right? Can two walk together unless they are in agree? Okay, come on. And when they had made an agreement with the laborer for 1 denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Then he went out about the third hour, around 9 o'clock, and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you also go work in the vineyard, and whatever is right. You saw what the word right means? I will give you. And they went their way. Again, he went at 3 o'clock. At noon, he did the same thing. And then, pay attention to this, about the 11th hour, 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, why are you standing here idle all day? All day they've been standing idle. They said to him, because no man has hired us. At least they were willing here. He said to them, you also go work in the vineyard, and whatever is right, I will give, you will receive. But they only work 1 hour. There was some there all day. Were they all entitled to the same thing? Who makes that decision? Think about it. So the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the steward, bring all of them, the laborers, and give them their wages, beginning with the last and ending with the first. Are we not the last? We are the last remnant of the house. Yeah, you realize that? We are the last. We are it. The Philadelphia group, the ones who have to bring it all together. And when those who had been hired at the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. And when the first came, they expected, now when the first came, they expected that they would receive more. But each of them also received 1 denarius. That was a lot of money back then too. Okay. And when they had received it, they murmured. Against who? Against who? Pastor? Saying, these last men have only worked 1 hour, and yet you have made them equal to us? Well, we have borne the burden of the heat of the day. He answered and said to them, friend, I did you no injustice. Did you not agree with me for 1 denarius? Verse 15, is it not lawful for me to do what I please with my own? We are Yahweh's. We are his treasure. We are not being allowed to go through anything that we were not meant to go through. Why be jealous because I am generous? So the last will be first and the first will be last. For many are called, but few are chosen. You see the problem with entitlement? Right away in their mind, they thought they were entitled to better, to more, because they had worked all day long, forgetting the agreement that they already had made that morning. And it was not their business what was done with those who only work an hour, but it was allowed to show this lesson for us to learn from. Yahweh is making sure he root away all bitterness from us, so we can be his perfect, pure sons and daughters. And you want to make sure we will be able to get along with each other perfect. Ephesians 2. Let's turn there. Ephesians 2. Found on page 916. Let me see how much of this we're going to read. Verse 2. In which you walk in time past according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the God, that is now at work in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all once conducted ourselves in lust of the flesh, performing the desires of the flesh. Verse 4. But Yahweh, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love, with which he loved us, even though being dead in our sins, he made us alive with Yahshua. Even though being dead in our sins, we're given this opportunity. We'll be saved through undeserved pardon. To earn this title. And has raised us up together and made us sit down together in the heavens with Yahshua Messiah. All this Yahweh has in plan for us. Verse 8, for indeed by undeserved pardon you will be saved through the faith. But this does not come out of you. You recognize that? It doesn't come out of something we're doing so special. It is a gift from who? It's a gift from Yahweh. This is coming from Yahweh. A gift from Yahweh. Eternal life. A gift from Yahweh. Yes, we have a job to do. We have to do our part in order to receive this gift. So what do we deserve? Let's turn to Matitya. Don't beat yourself up here. This is awesome, actually, when you see it. What do we deserve? Look at the other parable here. This will be my last scripture. In Matitya chapter 25, verses 14, starting in verse 14. For the kingdom of Yahweh will be like a man going on a journey into a far country, who summoned his own servants and handed his possession over to them. To one he gave 5 talents, you know the story. And then eventually 1 talent, based on their ability, and immediately went on his journey. But when he had received, but he who had received, verse 18, but he who had received 1, when he dug in the earth, went and dug in the earth and hid his ruler's money. After a long time, the ruler of those servants came and settled account with them. Then he who had 5 talents came forward and brought 5 other talents. Ruler, you handed me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained 5 other talents above those. His ruler, teacher, or pastor, Yahweh, Yahshua, said to him, well done, righteous and faithful servant. Well done. This is what we're going to deserve to hear. Well done. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your ruler. Now further down, the one who had the 1 talent. Then verse 24, then he who had received 1 talent came forward and said, ruler, I knew you to be a hard man. Is Yahweh hard? What has Yahweh done hard to us? Is he harsh? What has Yahweh done harsh to any one of us? I know you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown. It all belongs to Yahweh. And gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the earth. This is not what we need to do when we are going through our test and trial. Withdraw to ourselves. That's why Yahweh give us counselors. He give us guides. Help, iron sharpens iron, to make us into his perfect image, in the image that he wants to see in each and every one of us. We are entitled to the suffering we are going through right now, because that is what's going to mold us and bring us into the character that Yahweh wants to see in every one of us. So we don't hide our talents, but we put our talents to use by building up each other, enduring with each other through the suffering, whatever it is, or being a true friend to each other, someone who truly cares for one another. I pray that Yahweh bless your understanding. If you all please stand at this time. I now have the honor to introduce the great Kohan, Yeshua Hyla Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Be opening your books of Yahweh to Yahchanan, chapter 13. This is found on page 831. Yahchanan, chapter 13, and verse 19. The title of my sermon is, "We were told these things in advance so that we might see them come to pass. We might believe into the one sent, and declare, blessed is Yisrayl Hawkins who comes in the name of Yahweh." All right, here in Yahchanan 13 and verse 19. Now, Yeshua mentioned this 3 times in Yahchanan, but here's a specific place he mentioned it. But in verse 19 he says, "Now I tell you before it comes, in order that when it does come to pass, you believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me also receives him who sent me." All right, so how do you show that you receive the one that sent? Well, we know Deuteronomy 12, 5 through 8, Deuteronomy chapter 17, you go to the place that Yahweh's established his name, and you do whatever you were instructed to do. Okay? In the eighth book of Israel, I believe this is part 2. I didn't write it down, but the date shows it's part 2. On page 347. All right, I got on this page right here, and you can see this page of the Book of Israel. Okay, I wanted one little part of it, but anybody that tries to take notes from the Book of Israel, when you start reading the entire page, everything combines together. You just can't take one part. So I've got to go through this whole thing because it actually ties the entire sermon in together. All right, be turning over to Revelation 13, 1 through 18, so you know exactly what scriptures he's covering here. Revelation 13, 1 through 18. Okay, so you see the beast of the sea, which is what? The Catholic Church. We know that's the Catholic Church, all right? That's what it's talking about in verse 1. And then it continues to go forth, and it starts speaking of the second beast, all right? The beast that rises up, the beast, the little horn, the horn that speaks great words. All right, you continue going on, and verse 6, and he says, he opened his mouth in blasphemy against Yahweh to blaspheme his name and his house and those who dwell in heaven. Okay, continue on down into verse 11, and this is where you come into the United States, the second beast. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. All right, remember that prophecy in Zechariah, which shows the house of Yahweh would be established in the land that did not yet exist. This is that land. This is that second beast. And in verse 13, and he does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. And that's where we're going to start on this page in the book of Yisrael. So on page 347, it says, great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. And we know those fires is the nuclear explosion. Of course, nuclear war, the works of men's hands that is actually going to bring forth the destruction of the governments who created such a device. And notice they deceived. They deceived in verse 14. And deceived those who dwell upon the earth by those acts of power. And you have to understand, in Jeremiah chapter 23, it talks about how long will this be in the mouths of the prophets. They plan and they scheme. This is in their hearts, right, is what Jeremiah said. And we should understand that when something is in someone's heart, that means it's actually their desire, their planning, their scheming. This is an intentional thing they're actually trying to accomplish here in these last days. But he says that they should make a likeness of the beast which had the wound by sword and did live. Be like him, in other words, we should be like this beast that had the wound by the sword and did live. So be like the first beast. So the second beast job, the United States, is to cause everyone to follow the first beast, to be like, to be just like, to take on the characteristics. In verse 116, well, this beast is the city that sits on 7 hills. The woman you saw that is over this beast is the great city that sits on 7 hills. Speaking of the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church. That is actually led by the dragon, and authority is given unto him. If you remember in Revelation 17, last verse. And in verse 15, and he had power to give life to actually bring this about, and he's given power to bring this about. And he had power to give life to the likeness of this beast, that this likeness of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. All right, and we're starting to see this a lot in the news right now. And remember, there's certain things that you have to be able to accept in order to be a part of this system. All right, and you can see the nations that are rejecting this. All right, they're having restrictions put on them. Right, they're not allowed to buy or sell. They're not allowed to actually be a part of the rest of the world. They're actually being secluded, and you see these things taking place, and it's for a specific reason. Pastors borrowed this out before, but we're just going to try to tie it in. In verse 119, he says in verse 16, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, that they should give themselves a mark. The mark is the sign upon their right hands or in their forehead. The same, this is the mark of Satan, of course, which is Sunday and holidays. Okay, so we know that Sunday worship and the pagan holidays is the mark of the beast. The mark of Yahweh is the keeping of the Sabbath and the feast days. Okay, so that's the two differences, all right? You'll receive a mark upon your hand or upon your mind, all right? So doing the works of Yahweh at the feast, doing the works of Yahweh on the Sabbath day shows that you have the mark of Yahweh in your hands. Doing these things in your mind, focusing, actually keeping the Sabbath properly. But what about if you come and you keep the Sabbath, but then you go and do other things on first day? Does that still put the mark of the beast upon you? Pay attention. In verse 120, the mark of Yahweh is on your right hand or your forehead. The Sabbath on your right hand and in your mind. You cease from doing your works with your hands, of course, and you do Yahweh's work. That's the mark of Yahweh. He says to accept their mark is totally out here for you. It's plain and clear. It's Sunday keeping in rebellion against the Sabbath day. All right, so the mark of the beast is Sunday keeping, and it's the mark, and it's a rebellion against Yahweh. The Sabbath day shows obedience to Yahweh. All right, what's the key to the kingdom? Obedience, right? So that's the key we have to have right there. But it's not just one day a week. It's not just on the seventh day of the week. Rejection of the Sabbath and keeping Sunday, no matter how you keep Sunday, whether you go boating, skiing, or all of these goofy things that get you killed out here, that they urge you to do, you're breaking Yahweh's Sabbath and you're disobedient to Yahweh. So even if you uphold the Sabbath by coming here and coming to services and doing all the work of Yahweh on the Sabbath, if you don't take the teachings and that character that Yahweh's trying to put into us and carry it throughout the rest of the week, we're actually still taking on the characteristics. We're being made that likeness of that first beast. All right, so here he said, you go out boating and skiing and all these goofy things. All right, many times pastors warned us about going to the lake, going to the beaches, going out here, goofing off and doing things on vacation, having fun. Okay. Now, if you look at this article right here, this was on 6/18. All right, so this is when I first started pulling this up. This was the first one that came out when I first started getting this sermon together. Okay, 12-year-old girl got infected with flesh-eating bacteria on a Florida beach. Experts say this will become more common as ocean waters warm, okay? As ocean waters warm. Let's go ahead and read into this. So this was the first case that I saw, but every week after I saw this, there's been new cases, right? Don't quote me on this, but I believe there's been 5 cases since I first saw this, all right? She's one of them. She didn't die, but there's been 4 others since then. All 4 of those have died. All right? This is a flesh-eating disease that can sometimes result in amputations or death. People can contact the vibro infection after wading in this water. Guess what? Wading in water. That means you're just walking through water. That's how somebody actually caught this. Walking and kicking the water, they actually got this because they had a cut on their leg. Walking through water with an open wound or eating raw shellfish from the water. Okay, now we know what the law of Yahweh is. All right? Deuteronomy chapter 14. Be turning over there real fast. So we can just see exactly what curses were being brought forth here. All right, in verse 9, he says, these you may eat of all that are in the waters. You may eat of all that has both fins and scales. Whatever does not have both fins and scales, you must not eat. It is unclean for you. Okay, so this is a warning. This is a precautionary warning telling people not to do this. All right, but eating raw shellfish from the water. All right. Earlier this morning, a 12-year-old girl contracted the flesh-eating bacteria at Destine Beach in Florida. She needed emergency surgery, without which she would have lost her leg. The flesh-eating bacteria is spreading beyond its traditional region, all right, in part due to the warming ocean temperatures caused by climate change. Now, what's causing the climate change? It's the STDs. It's the sexual sins that's bringing these things forth. Now, we're going to learn that these unclean foods and these sexual diseases They go hand in hand, all right? That's what's causing the confusion. That's what's bringing forth this about. Now, when 12-year-old Kylie Brown's family went vacationing in Destin Beach, Florida, earlier this month, they didn't expect to fight for their daughter's survival, but they would have. We should have, all right? We should know this is what to expect because we've been warned, all right? They would have known this if they would have heard the message from the one sent. So I didn't print it off, but the scriptures or the parts of the books of Israel that pastors mention this, you can look it up. 7th Book of Israel, Part 2, Chapter 6, verses 20 through 35. The 8th Book of Israel, chapter 4, verse 17, and the 8th Book of Israel, chapter 24, verse 95. All these are examples of what Pastor talked about going to the beach, how he regretted ever taking his children there, how he ever regretted teaching his children to go there because of the defilement of the sand. All right? Well, we go to the beach, but we don't go in the water. Okay? A woman who was walking through the beach tripped and fell and scuffed her knee. She died a few days later because of the bacteria she got. All right? People going down rafts down the Tennessee River are dying from this disease. All right? This is a flesh-eating disease. All right? It actually attacks. All right? The name of it actually means dying tissue, and that's what it causes. It's actually dying tissue, which should mean to us, we should understand the laws, this is abominable. It spreads, okay? And that's how it's actually working. On June 9th, Brown walked in the waves with the water just up above her ankles. Less than a day later, she started complaining about a pain in her leg that traveled throughout her body and became more intense over time. Her mother, Michelle Brown, wrote in a Facebook post. He says, the doctors diagnosed her with necrotizing fasciitis. Necrotizing means dying, all right? Fasciitis, it means skin or muscle. It's tissue, so it's actually dying. Just simply by walking in ankle-deep water. A rare flesh-eating bacteria that can be fatal even with treatment. All right, people contract the fibro infections in the Chesapeake Bay and along the Gulf Coast areas after eating or handling raw shellfish or swimming in contaminated water. Rising ocean temperatures may be allowing the bacteria to spread to previously unaffected waters, and that's what they're actually seeing, all right? You're starting to see, if we've been paying to the news lately, the entire Gulf Coast, all right? There's actually dead zones. They're calling these dead zones. Life cannot exist in these places anymore. Now, people can catch the bacteria by handling or consuming raw shellfish. In the past, vibro infections have arisen after people swam in or came into contact with seafood from the Chesapeake Bay. But it was very rare for this to occur farther north in the cooler Delaware Bay. That's no longer the case. According to he said his colleagues, 5 patients in her case were infected after they were exposed to water in the Delaware Bay, all right? Or they consumed crabs, all right? So eating those unclean things. Okay? But this isn't the only way you can catch it, all right? There's actually been cases where people have walked by, a woman walked by and scraped her arm on a nail, right? The nail had mold spores on it, which created this bacteria inside of her body. So this is spreading rapidly. Now, often these infections can be treated with antibiotics, but the dead tissue is sometimes removed or the associated limb amputated to keep the infection from spreading to the bloodstream. Infection leads to death in 20% of the cases. People can get infected by eating raw or undercooked shellfish, especially oysters. Now, we've heard this before, all right? Don't eat undercooked pork. Make sure you burn it to a crisp, all right? We know it's not that you're eating undercooked raw shellfish. We know the law warns us. Do not eat these things. Whether cooked, uncooked, or whatever, these things are not clean and acceptable for us to eat. So when we allow these things to be ingested by us, we open ourselves up for these diseases. It can also infect the skin of an open wound exposed to brackish water or salt water. Some people get infections after wading through the storm floodwaters. All right, so right there where you see all this bacteria and stuff forming right there in the Gulf Coast, well, we just had a Hurricane Barry, all right? Just took all that water and pushed it right into Louisiana. Now we're going to start seeing, people, they always warn people, don't go walking through the floodwaters and stuff. Why? Because this spreads this disease. The infection courses throughout the entire body, kind of like a hurricane or a tornado that ravages everything. Remember, how much power did Pastor say was in one drop of the ocean water? Right? Remember these things. It's very important. Of the 5 patients mentioned in the new case report, 3 had to get the infected tissue removed, 1 man had to have his hands and feet amputated, and 1 person died in the hospital. All right? And then there's been many more since then. Okay? And that's just by something you could easily pick up by going out and having a fun day Sunday out in the world. In verse 17, here in verse 122 in the Book of Israel, he says, and that no one might buy or sell, going back to Revelation 13, no one might buy or sell. And this is Pastor. He said, could this mean food? All right, could this mean food? Well, of course, we know it means food. How do we know it means food? Well, because Malachi Martin, The Keys of This Blood. Pastors taught us about this many times, warned us, this is what they're going to use. Now, who was it that said this? Who said they were going to use food to control the people? Henry Kissinger. All right, very important. Now, let me show you this real fast. I'm just going to point this out. Right here it says Henry Kissinger. You might not be able to see it, but we actually misspelled it in the Book of Israel. Now, that's very important, all right? Please understand this. We misspelled it, all right? Because it actually changes the meaning of the name. It actually changes it and backs up Pastor even more, all right? So Henry Kissinger. Who is Henry Kissinger? He was actually a diplomat, a security advisor, and he was in office from 1969 to 1977, okay? So he worked with Nixon and with multiple presidents. He's still around kicking the day. He was born in 5/27, 1923, all right? But he's been a very important role, okay? Now, understand, I'm not pointing out that this man is any more evil than anything else or anyone else inside this system, but what this man is doing is causing everyone to follow the first beast. He's being used, the teachings he's giving is in accordance with this. He's actually from Jewish descent, okay? He actually fled Nazi Germany. Now, Henry Kissinger said that it's coming about, and we already see the famines, all right? We see the famines. We already see the deformities of the food. We see the deformities of the food. What do you think Pastor's talking about there? Well, we know that how they're deforming the food, all right? They're actually creating food now that can't reproduce itself, all right? Genetically modified organisms. We actually see these things taking place. Now, here's the article, all right? Kissinger, control oil and you control nations, control food and you control the people. U.S. strategy deliberately, all right? They devise and they plan and they scheme. It's in their heart. Jeremiah 23 deliberately destroyed family farming in the U.S. and abroad to lead to 95% of all grain reserves in the world being under the control of 6 multinational agribusiness corporations. All right, now inside the 17th book of Israel, Pastor actually covered these nations that were doing well. They were taking care of themselves. They were completely self-sufficient. Then the governments came in and said, let us start providing the food for you. Let us grow the food for you. Let us sell the food to you. And you guys go out and make money. You start businesses and you go out and you do these things and start making money for yourself. So that's what they did. Now, after generation after generation after generation, the ability to grow their own food vanished because they no longer had the ability to do these things. Because now they were feeding the system. They were working for the system. They no longer had the education that they once had to be able to grow their own food, to take care of themselves. So what did the governments do? They stopped providing food for them. So now these nations are starving to death. Right? This is all part of the system. You control the food, you control the people. But understand, it's just not controlling the amount or the quantity of the food, it's controlling the quality of the food. They're controlling the quality of the food to where they get certain results from the people. Right? And it seems a simple strategy, and the fix is already in. Whether it can be or will be reversed will be determine the fate of humanity. All right? As Noam Chomsky pointed out, in both Old and New World orders, the central goal has pivoted around the issue of control. Control of the population is a major task of any state that is dominated by sectors of the domestic society and therefore functions primarily, he says, in their interest. Such particular sectors as referred to the minority elite who pursue controlling the strategies to engineer nation and international affairs in line with their aims. And these aims are, for the most part, based on greed and power and the need to keep the masses contented and docile. All right? The pattern often adopted in the parading national thinking as a vehicle in which to present specific agendas most suitable in the hierarchical power structures, and is through the rationalism of the elite technocratic establishment that the global governance has found is the most articulate expression. A particular example of corporatism, a social control, can be found within a global food system, the ways they are monopolized and managed. The control and management of global food supplies has been a corporate and political priority for decades. He says, with U.S.-based conglomerates leading the charge, as a lead establishment political figure, Henry Kissinger remarked in 1970, control the oil, you control the nations. Control the food, and you control the people. Recent research places multinational corporations behind the push toward controlling the food supplies. Now, in 1974, the World Food Conference in Rome outlined the necessity of maintaining sufficient world grain reserves, especially since the price of the world's grain had shot up dramatically via the huge increase in the oil price during the 1970s oil crisis. At one point, the world's oil prices had risen by 400%. U.S. export strategy in the 1970s was further control of food supplies. This led to moves to consolidate power over 95% of all grain reserves in the world under the control of 6 multinational agribusiness corporations: Cargill Grain Company, Continental Grain Company, Cook Industries Incorporation, Dreyfus, Bunge Company, and Archer Daniels Midland, all U.S.-based companies. The U.S. long-term strategy was to dominate the global market in grain and agricultural commodities as outlined in the 1970s by Richard Nixon. This policy conceded that taking the dollar off the gold exchange in the standard August 1971 to make U.S. grain exports competitive with the rest of the world. However, in order for the U.S. to become the world's most competitive agribusiness producer, it had to replace traditional American family-based farming with the now widespread huge factory farm production. And that's what we see in the world today. In other words, traditional agriculture was systematically replaced with agribusiness production through changes in domestic policy. For example, domestic farm programs that had previously protected smaller farm incomes were phased out during the Nixon's term in office. This policy was then exported to developing countries. Right? Now, here in the first book of Israel in 13 and verse 5, Pastor actually talked about this. In the 17th book of Israel, 1078, chapter 10 and verse 78, this is where Pastor was talking about those nations that were starving to death because they removed the ability for them to farm for themselves, for them to fend for themselves. The Nixon administration began the process of destroying the domestic food production in developing countries as the opening shot in the undeclared war to create a vast new global market and efficient American food exports. Nixon also used the post-war trade regimen known as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT. All right? So that's part of that news article that Pastor was warning us about right there. All right, now I said Kissinger was misspelled here in the Book of Israel. So in the Book of Israel, we have it spelled Kissenger. The proper spelling, his actual birth name was not Henry Kissinger, it was Heinz Alfred Kissinger. All right, the actual spelling is Kissinger. Okay, so right here. All right, this is Kissinger. This is the English gematria, 666. Okay, so that's what we're actually seeing here. Now, these other numbers are very important too. 340, which is the Jewish gematria, Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, it means to hate, to be hostile, to be an enemy. Strong's Hebrew Dictionary 111 comes from 2301 and 2300, and it means to be sharp, to be severe, to be fierce, to sharpen. Okay, so we get these numbers. We know these numbers because we know these things are very important. We should know these things are very important because of this book right here, right? The Mark of the Beast, right? This is the first time I ever saw gematria or ever learned about it and everything else and actually saw how Pastor used these things to uncover the secret things that Yahweh was trying to show us in these last days. All right, now Pastor started writing this book in 76, right? I was born in 77. I'm 42 years old. That shows you how old this knowledge is. It's much older than me, all right? Pastor had this knowledge. He was inspired to do these things before I was ever even born, okay? So it's very important to understand this. Now, Pastor gave us an example of this book right here, The Mark of the Beast, and he was talking about it just a few sermons ago. He was talking about how we had this thing done, and we had H.V. Chapman's bind this book for us. So they bound the Mark of the Beast for us, right? If you Google H.V. Chapman's, it's called H.V. Chapman's and Sons in Abilene. You Google them, you're going to see this right here. This is the front office. This is the wall in front of their office, okay? You won't be able to see it, but if you look right here, it's real small. That's 2 copies. The Mark of the Beast Volume 1 and the Mark of the Beast Volume 2 sitting right there. These are the ones they bound for us, all right? So I just wanted to paint a picture for you whenever Pastor explained these things. They are still in business, all right? H.V. Chapman, who was the one who was doing it back then, he's no longer alive. His son Stan now does it. But these right here are the books that Pastor was talking about, all right? So just to show you, it's there. You can Google it and see exactly what Pastor was talking about, all right? Now, Kissinger misspelled, Kissenger, all right? Well, the spelling actually changes the gematria to 107, all right? Number 107. 107 in the Strong's Hebrew Dictionary comes from 104, and it means a pistol. A pistol, all right? A letter, all right? A synonym for a letter is a memorandum, all right? Right here. Exposing the global population control agenda. U.S. government population control. This word right here, memorandum of the SSMM 200, the Kissinger report, okay? So that's actually, the misspelling of the name actually points to what Pastor was speaking of, the report that was actually given on what we're supposed to be paying attention to. So Pastor talked about the keys of this blood. Malachi Martin was speaking of how do they plan on doing this? Well, Kissinger said control the oil, you control the nations. What do we see them warring over? The oil, they're controlling the nations. You control the food, the quantity, and the quality. You control the people. Because believe it or not, your actions are actually determined off what you put inside your body too. You eat unclean foods, you eat foods that don't bring you life, it brings you death. You start to die. You start to make poor choices, all right? You feed in righteousness. You feed in clean foods. You actually start to develop righteousness. Human population control is reducing the birth rate of any given population, all right? How is one way they reduce the birth rate? Abortion, all right? Abortion is one of the main ways they're reducing the birth rate, and this is actually being forced in a lot of countries. Some countries are actually being told sterilize or die, all right? You either do this or you don't get food, and this is what they're actually doing in these countries, right? Now, this is a pie chart showing the reasons why women have abortions, all right? Now, the big argument in politics right now is we want to still have the option on the table for those who may have been made pregnant by incest or by rape, okay? That's the big thing. Well, let's hear what the women actually have to say about that had the abortions. The number one reason they have an abortion, and these are tied, 21% each, and they're pretty much the same thing. I can't afford a baby, and I'm unready for responsibility. Why did Pastor tell us the number one reason for them having abortions was? Lack of responsibility, all right? That's exactly the reason, all right? So effects on lifestyle was number two. That all goes hand in hand. If it's going to affect my lifestyle, that means I don't want to be responsible for my decision. Kill the baby so I can go back to having fun. All right, now you go down here. Let's see here. I was a victim of rape or incest. 1%. It's actually less than 1%. So the false argument they have that they want to justify this as a way of protecting the women is false. It's less than 1% of the population that's had abortions. The main reason? We have a lack of responsibility. People are not taking responsibility for their actions, and this is taught forth from this beast. And they teach it, why? Because they want to depopulate the earth. They want to reduce the population. U.S. government population control. So this is the second beast. And what does the second beast do? Causes everyone to worship the first beast. The United States National Security Council is the highest decision-making body of foreign policy in the United States. On December 10th, 1974, it promulgated a top-secret document entitled National Security Study Memorandum, the NSSM 200, also known as the Kissinger Report. Its subject was implications of worldwide population growth for the security of overseas interest. The Kissinger Report was made public when it was declassified and was transferred to the U.S. National Archives in 1990. Although the United States government has issued hundreds of policy papers dealing with the various aspects of American national security since 1974, the Kissinger Report continues to be the foundational document of the U.S. government population control. The purpose of Kissinger Report. The primary purpose of the U.S. government population control efforts is to maintain access to the mineral resources of less developed countries. They're going to be called LDCs, less developed countries. All right, the Kissinger Report says the U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. That fact gives the U.S. enhanced interest in political, economic, and social stability of the supplying countries. In order to protect the U.S. commercial interest, the NSSM 200 cited a number of factors that could interpret the smooth flow of materials from the LDCs to the United States, including large population of anti-imperialist youth, whose numbers must be limited by government population control. So the youth, their numbers must be limited by government population control. How do you limit the youth? Kill them. Murder. The document identified 13 nations by the name that would primary targets of the U.S. government population control efforts under the heading concentration of the key countries. All right. And why do they want to eliminate the youth? Because the youth is usually self-idealist. All right. They don't usually fall in. If you notice the youth, right, even the young people here, they don't just fall in with what they're told to do. Sometimes they actually have to experience it. They have to see it to actually believe what they're being taught. Now, young men and young women here, don't fall into that system. You have to believe and trust what Yahweh's house is warning you. And that's the point of this sermon. I want to guarantee you everything that pastors brought out to us is to prevent. The laws of Yahweh are not laws to burden you down. They're laws of prevention. They are set in order to prevent us from making mistakes. Because once we make the choice, the consequence is going to come. There's no undoing it. Dying, we will die if we follow the pattern of sin. We were given a witness to testify of these things before they take place, so that when we see these things take place in the news, we could witness to the rest of the world that that man is the man that Yahweh sent to earth to warn us. That is Yahweh's chosen witness. According to the Kissinger report, elements of the implementation government population control programs could include the legalization of abortion, number one, the financial incentives for countries to increase their abortion, sterilization, and contraception use rates. All right, so remember we had on the news about the billionaire going out and promoting the vaccines in these third world countries. Vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. Okay? Indoctrination of children. Indoctrination of children. What do you think they're indoctrinating the children with? Homosexuality. Do you see the push for this thing inside the world right now? It's not just the United States, it's every nation is pushing these things. Why? Because if I can convince you to destroy the family unit that comes forth from a man and a woman, I've now depopulated the earth. There's no more production. I've now stopped the plan of Yahweh. That's what they're trying to achieve. Mandatory population control and coercion of other forms, such as withholding disaster food. Well, we've seen that take place lately, haven't we? Withholding disaster food aid unless the LDC, all right, remember what that was? That was the, well, I don't even remember what it was. Let's see here. The lesser development countries. He says population control programs, all right? So actually controlling. You will not receive these things unless you agree to follow this system. You have to. It's force. Going out and conquering. China, all right? China. Let's get into China. All right, in the 8th book of Israel. 8th book of Israel, page 122. This is the 10th chapter on verse 71. All right, in verse 67, he says, okay, the key is going to be agriculture. All right, so we just covered those news articles right there. Now, this is Pastor talking about those news articles. The key is agriculture. China is terrified of the current situation. It has real physical shortages. It says, reverencing China, still having memories of starvation of the 1960s seared in its collective mind. If you read the history that had people starving to death in China, they don't want that again, and they see the same thing taking place at this time. So they see the same thing taking place at this time. Why? Because the food is actually being controlled. All right, these things are actually being controlled. Not only the food, but the quality of the food, the quantity of the food. Now the problem is, well, they eat unclean foods. All right, that's the problem. That's the main part of the problem is the foods they're eating is unclean. Now one of the main things in their diet, pork. All right, what's the biggest outbreak in China right now? Pig Ebola, all right, which is spreading fast throughout there. So it's actually eliminating their ability to eat. And it's actually spreading faster than what they were able to control. So you see these things taking place, right? Now the next time I speak, I want to tie all this in together into the food supply and actually discuss how they're actually using the food supply to control us. Okay? Because think of it this way. In order to change the hearts and the minds, all right, in order to change this, I have to cleanse this, okay? In order to change my heart, I have to cleanse this. But in order to cleanse this, I have to eat clean food. I have to put food in my belly, inside my gut, and feed the healthy bacteria that Yahweh put there in order for it to be beneficial to my body. If I eat things that are defiled or abominable, this now causes confusion, and it wreaks havoc with the brain to where now the desires are no longer on Yahweh, they're on serving ourselves. So hopefully we get to cover and discuss exactly the plan and the process of how we can cure our gut bacteria and actually eat the way pastors taught us to eat to where we can start fixing the hearts and the minds of everyone around us, right? But it starts with ourselves, and that's the main point of it. With this, if you'll please stand. It's my pleasure to present to you the Great Kahan Shemuel Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. And Yahweh willing, you'll all have the peace of Yahweh with you. I like to think about things that I don't have to deal with right now. You know, think ahead. Think ahead. But yet, you can't leave behind some of those parts of Yahweh's plan that we've been being taught. Pastor brought up about Adam and Eve and how intelligent they were. And I thought about the awesome responsibility. You know, we think about how difficult it would be to heal, to name all the animals. and that their names had to coincide with what they were, so that you would understand that a kangaroo is a kangaroo because it does what kangaroos do. I mean, it's all in the Word. But I thought about the responsibility, the awesome responsibility that Yahweh placed upon Adam with this assignment. What if Adam would have named a cat? Would we be running around today not having a name for cats? Now, I don't mean that as a funny thing. I mean it as a responsibility thing. Think about the awesome responsibility that's placed upon each one of us when we're called into Yahweh's house and we come here for the first time. I don't know that I really thought about that as being a responsibility, but it's a truly great responsibility. Think about the responsibility given to each one of us to bring forth the holy seed, to bring forth righteousness. Think about the responsibility that Yahweh has. I almost said it, and I got to think about it if I want to use this word or not. Think about the responsibility that Yahweh endures just to keep everything alive. What if he says, I'm kind of tired. I don't think I want to do my job this afternoon. What occurs if Yahweh doesn't uphold that responsibility? I don't know. I can't tell you if something dies, if someone dies, I don't know. But I do know that without that responsibility and without Yahweh accepting that responsibility wholeheartedly as a life or death thing, then things occur, things change. It's a tremendous responsibility when we're called into Yahweh's house. Look at page 957. 957. Book of 1 Kepha. Verses 3 through 9. It says, "Blessed be Yahweh, the Father of our King, Yeshua Messiah, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Yeshua Messiah from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, and which does not fade away, reserved in the heavens for you, who are kept by the power of Yahweh through the faith for salvation, ready to be revealed at the end time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you must suffer grief through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than gold which perishes, though it is tried with fire, might be found worthy of praise, honor, and glory at the appearing of Yeshua Messiah. Although you have not seen him, you love him, whom now you do not see, yet believing, you rejoice with inexpressible joy and full of glory, receiving the ultimate result of your faith, the salvation of your soul or of your life." Think about that responsibility that Adam was given to name of all of Yahweh's creation. That's pretty awesome. But how about if we think about the responsibility that Adam and Eve had to create the first man-child? It had never been done before the way that it was done at that time. There's so many firsts in the house of Yahweh. Adam and Eve were the first humans given the responsibility to work and to protect the tree of life. We are given that same responsibility in this last time period. It's nothing to be taken as small. We allow the day-to-day drudgery, dreariness, barnacles to slow us down. We're so busy thinking about, how am I going to do this? And how am I going to do that? How am I going to do this? We're just so busy in our minds. We're so busy because there's so much of the work that needs to be done that I know I tend to lose sight of these responsibilities that Yahweh has given to us. But even more, I don't always think about the responsibility that Yahweh has to bring forth, to maintain, to continue life. I don't know what it's like to make me blink because my eye needs to blink. I don't have to think about it, it just blinks. I don't have to think about how much saliva do I let go into my mouth so I'm not slobbering while I'm up here, but just enough to keep my tongue from sticking to my mouth. Look, I know that's little things, but every one of these things, Yahweh has accepted the responsibility to make sure that we do those things or have the ability to have moisture in our eyes, moisture in our mouths. A bell pepper tastes, well, let me rephrase this. A bell pepper ought to taste the same way today as it did yesterday. And that's because Yahweh kept the responsibility to do that. We have a responsibility in the house of Yahweh to take care of everything that Yahweh has blessed us with here. Whether it's a tool, think about when the septic systems are emptied. And that tank has gotten full and it goes out to wherever it is that we dump it so that we can have an empty tank to go and empty another septic system and on down the line. I remember pastor's sermons, he said, those little guys are having a blast. They're building families. I would really think it's pretty cool to get sucked out of that septic system and put in a big old area that the toilets aren't always flushing on you. And, you can have fun, you can build your family, and it's well, I don't want to use vacation, but it's a joy for those little guys when they get taken out of that septic system. And I know that may sound dumb and it may sound stupid and silly, but it's true. It's the same thing with the little guys in our eyes that keep cleaning our eyes out. Or the ones that at night, they look like little rhinoceroses, or maybe sheep, I don't remember now, but they crawl around on your eyelashes. Yahweh takes his responsibility seriously. So should we. Whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a tractor, whether it's a weed eater, whether it's a wrench, whether it's a hammer, all of those things belong to Yahweh. I don't want to have to stand up in the presence of Yahweh and defend why I didn't take care of those tools better than if they were mine, because they're Yahweh's. I don't want to have to stand there and explain that I misused Yahweh's money because I didn't take care of something that Yahweh gave the work to be able to do the work, to accomplish the responsibility Yahweh has given to us. Those microorganisms had to live for a long time without having any hope of someone righteous to lead and guide them after Yeshua was sacrificed. Until Yisrayl and Jacob were born. I could just about imagine those little guys. They knew they were born, but they weren't doing their jobs yet. But they just knew something awesome was taking place. They couldn't explain it. Gut feeling, whatever. But they knew the time. Those microorganisms are not ignorant. They bring life. They create things, whether it's an ear of corn, a pea in a pod, or me and you. It's a great responsibility that Yahweh gives us. And the title for what this sermon is today is, with great responsibility comes great power. The power doesn't come first. The responsibility to uphold that power comes first. Adam and Eve had all of the knowledge, all of the wisdom that they had. And they made it to what? Genesis chapter 3 before they sinned? Wow. Now, I'm not putting them down. And I know that's condensed and it's probably a lot longer than any of us really think about, except Pastor, he knows. But they were still deceived with all the knowledge and all the wisdom. They had Sabbaths. They were taught the truth. They were taught just like you and I are being taught. Look at page 426, the book of Iyyob. 426, Iyyob chapter 28. Iyyob 28:28. Then to mankind Yahweh said, behold, the reverence of Yahweh, that is wisdom. And to turn from evil, that is understanding. That's profound. 3 little lines. Behold, the reverence of Yahweh, that is wisdom. And to turn from evil, that is understanding. If you go back to 1 Kepha, where we were earlier, 1 Kepha, page 957, starting at verse 13, it says, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober and hope to the end for the undeserved pardon that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. As obedient children, do not conform to the former lusts you had when you lived in ignorance. But as He who called you is holy, so you also become holy in all your conduct. Because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on the Father, who without respect of persons judges according to each man's work, how serious, how much effort we put forth, how serious we accept this responsibility that Yahweh has blessed us with, according to each man's, judges according to each man's work, conduct yourselves throughout the time of your sojourning here in reverence, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things such as silver or gold from your idolatrous way of life handed down to you by tradition from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Messiah, as of a lamb, without blemish and without spot, who truly was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you, who through him we do believe in Yahweh, who raised him up from the dead and gave him glory, that your faith and hope might be in Yahweh. Since you have purified your souls by obeying the truth, through the Spirit and unfeigned and genuine love of the brothers and the sisters, love one another fervently with a pure heart, having been begotten not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of Yahweh, the law and the prophets, which lives and remains forever. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of the grass. The grass withers and the flower falls away, but the word of Yahweh, the law and the prophets, endures forever. Now this is the word which was preached through the message to you. Everything we do fulfills that responsibility to bring forth life. Think about it. When we cut grass, and it's tall grass, it's a foot tall. Sometimes it gets that high. When you cut it, all of that stuff that was up at the top goes down to the bottom, and the winds blow and we walk and the animals walk. We're bringing that grass closer and closer to the soil. It composts, it deteriorates, and it begins to feed the earth. When the cows eat, there's a biological process that takes place that's beneficial to not only mankind, not only to the cow, but also to the earth. It's all our responsibility to maintain the life that Yahweh has placed here. Sometimes we just get so busy thinking about ourselves and how can I get this for me and how can I get that for me. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we're here for. Remember, I didn't come to serve, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. Even that shows the responsibility that we have when we're here. It's amazing that each one of us is here, and we all have something to do to fulfill that responsibility that Yahweh gave to us in this last generation, in this last era, this last work. We've been offered this great responsibility. And I don't know if I realized that when I came to the house and went through baptism counseling and went through the vow and signed a little paper. And I don't know that I really realized what I was accepting the responsibility for. And I don't know that I've thought about it since then, because we're too busy. When we're here, we're always doing this and doing that and building this and tearing this down and rebuilding that and cleaning this. But we should take a little bit of time, even if it's just when we lay down and go to sleep. Think about the great responsibility that Yahweh has entrusted us with, so that we can not only qualify ourselves, but help one another to qualify to be those people called by the name of Yahweh forever, priests and priestesses. Priests and priestesses. The immediate family of Yahweh. What a responsibility. As wise, as intelligent as Adam and Eve was, they didn't make it. I'm not saying they didn't make it in the kingdom. I'm saying they didn't make it. They fell. They sinned. And we had to wait, all mankind had to wait, all creation had to wait until this generation when Pastor brought back salvation to all creation. Not just what's here on this earth or in the earth, but all over the universe. That responsibility that we have, if you think about it too hard, let me rephrase that. If I think about it too hard, it scares the dickens out of me. That's a lot of responsibility. It doesn't matter what your job is here. It's part of that overall responsibility to bring forth life. How can we set that aside? How can we put that down and not count it as something to be desired? Think about the responsibility Pastor has and how we can help him continue that responsibility by everything that we do, think, and we say. Or we can make it difficult on him by everything we do, think, or we say. Just the ability to say a prayer that we know that Yahweh can hear is an awesome responsibility. There's people out there that pray to whoever they pray to and think, oh, they got a personal relationship. But we get to pray to the Heavenly Father whose name is Yahweh, who created everything. What an amazing responsibility and an awesome honor. He gave us this responsibility in order for us to be able to qualify for the power that He wants to give us. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. He gave us the power over sin. He gave us the responsibility to build His house. And none of us really knew each other before we got here. Well, maybe some of you did. I didn't know anybody before I got here. I didn't know anybody. He gave us the responsibility to build His house in order for us to qualify for the great power to resurrect the dead. We are such a blessed people. No other people have ever been offered the ability to raise the dead. And we wouldn't even know about it if Yahweh didn't give the responsibility to Yisrayl Hawkins, an Okie, to start a work in the middle of this place. I hope someone in my family doesn't mind me telling this story, but I'm going to tell it. Since she's not here, I won't hear about it for a while. We came here the very first time. She and I both wore contacts. And the wind was blowing and the sand was just in our eyes. I think all the sand just right to our eyes. It didn't go anywhere else, just right in our eyes. And I remember she said, "Oh, you really think Yahweh chose this place?" It was amazing. So Yahweh blessed us with the answer. Get rid of the contacts. It was simple. Get rid of the contacts. And stay here because this is the place Yahweh chooses to place His name in these last days. He did not make a mistake calling any of us out. It wasn't a mistake. And what if you were born here and you weren't called out? Well, that's even better. That's even better. He protected you all that time. He waited until your mom and your dad were just right before you could come into the world. That's pretty special. Think about the responsibility that we have in our own families. I don't want this to sound wrong, but there's certain people, in a family, it's our job to cut the grass, take out the garbage. Don't gripe about it. Do it. Sometimes your responsibility might be cooking oatmeal, or fried eggs, or fried chicken. Those chickens, those oats, they all had the responsibility in Yahweh's plan to be there for you to be able to make fried chicken and to make oatmeal. Or we wouldn't have it. Look, it's a joy. Doesn't Scripture say, let's see, I'm going to paraphrase it. Doesn't Scripture say that it shouldn't be grievous to keep Yahweh's law? It should be a joy. We keep hearing rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Well, maybe it's a little hard to rejoice over oatmeal, but there's so much here for us to rejoice over. Just look in the front of you, the side of you, behind you. There's so much to rejoice about, to be thankful for. Pastor has done something I don't know of any man ever doing in the Holy Scriptures. He took people like me and made us who we are now. He gave us a place to come before we ever thought about coming. He was building a place for us before he knew us and before we ever thought about him and before we ever thought about Yahweh. But Yahweh had him building a place. What, in 1962, being on the radio saying the things that he said? I was born in 62. But some of you weren't. Look at how serious pastor takes the responsibility of being the overseer of the House of Yahweh. Think about how much responsibility Yeshua has as high priest over the House of Yahweh. It's our responsibility to read, to study, to grow, to build one another up, to love one another into the kingdom. That's our responsibility. To be ready for the 2 billion, to be ready for however many else is out there. With great responsibility comes great power. The power over life and death. You're an amazing group of people. The most amazing group of people ever. You're here as the 7th era of the House of Yahweh. There was no other, and there won't be one after. Yahweh is giving us the responsibility to bring peace, joy to all of his creation, wherever they are, whatever they look like, little T9C rhinoceroses or sheep, or it doesn't matter. Our jobs, our responsibility, the priesthood, is to bring forth life, to protect the food supply. That's a responsibility to take seriously. When it gets tough and somebody steps on your toe, somebody calls you a name, think about that responsibility. Think about what is expected of us. Nothing more has been expected of anyone than of pastor and his family. Think about it. There was a lot of expectations for people, but as a group, that's a lot of responsibility Yahweh placed upon pastor, and he's placing upon us. And I don't want to let pastor down. I don't want to let Yeshua down. I darn sure don't want to let Yahweh down. I don't think any of us do. Rejoice. Be joyful. Enjoy your place here in the house of Yahweh. Realize it's not just a place. It's the place of peace. It's the place where all knowledge originates, comes from, is explained, is clarified. There is nothing without this place of protection. Nothing. And if you'll all please stand. It's my great honor and privilege to turn this podium over to the next speaker.